Foreign direct investment driving development. Sustainable growth through knowledge transfer. Technology as a solution. Innovation as a way forward. Over 70 ministers, 140 countries, over 500 exhibitors, 8,000 square meters of exhibition, 15,000 businessmen and investors. The annual investment meeting, sustainable development through FDI-induced innovation and technology transfer.
The title of our session here today is probably one of the most important in terms of in the world of business currently. And I think one of the things I'm going to try and do in the 10 or 12 or so minutes that I have to kick off this session is to try and walk you through what I think are some fundamental seismic changes that are occurring in the world of business, international business, foreign direct investment that are occurring around us today. These are, of course, particularly important for the location that we're hosted in here in the UAE, which is one of the crossroads, one of the hubs of the modern global economy. So let me quickly try and walk you through some of these. The basis that of the world we are in, and in fact this tremendous institution, the AIM, this meeting, the theme that we're here to talk about, can be summarized in what we might call a flowers and bees model, where fundamentally we have locations on the one hand, and locations are places like, of course, like Dubai, like Mumbai, like Tokyo, like New York, like London, and we have multinational enterprises, multinational or MNEs. I'll use that. I think hopefully this is something that we all know. We have multinational firms. Now, what's the fundamental difference between these two is these are the two fundamental components of global value chains. And the fundamental difference between these two components of global value chains is the notion of location and portability, mobility. Locations are fixed in space. They cannot move. Dubai is here. It's not moving anywhere. On the other hand, firms are mobile. Firms can move. Firms can move from location to location, and this is happening increasingly. What we've seen in the past is that firms were the bees. They moved from location to location, from flower to flower, looking for attractive locations to find markets and to find resources. This has been the focus of a lot of our work in business schools over the last 100 years or so. However, increasingly, as we have seen from this meeting that we're in, if you go into the exhibitors hall out there, one of the things that we're seeing increasingly is our modern world is one where locations are increasingly competing with one another to attract these firms. So we have the flowers and bees model that we live in is one where we have fixed locations and mobile firms working together, co-dependent upon each other, co-evolving through time. Locations change over time. Firms change over time. And they both affect each other as time passes. Okay, so this is basically the fundamental basis of what we want to talk about. In the next 10 minutes that I have left, I'm going to try to walk you through what I believe are three megatrends, three things that are three fundamental seismic changes that are reshaping the world economy around us. These things have begun, of course, a long time ago. Probably you could trace some of the early glimmerings of these trends even back to the caravans, to the caravanserai. However, what we've been seeing is over the last 20 years or so is these small little trickle, these small changes have become a flood. The pace of change is increasing so fast that what's going to occur over the next 10 or 15 years is going to fundamentally alter the nature of the global economy. So now what you will see is these three megatrends are going to be pointed to at the top right-hand corner of your screen. It says 1, 2, and 3. So the first megatrend is a shift from a trade and goods world to a trade and activities world. These global value chains that we're talking about are being fine-sliced into narrower and narrower and more specialized activities. What used to happen in the world of the past, the world of 100 years ago, was that goods and services were produced in locations, and when they were traded, entire goods were made in one location and shipped to another through trade. What happened in a location was a good or a service. An entire good or a service was produced in a location. This is becoming less and less true. It's so untrue today that no location in the world produces any goods or any services. What occurs in locations are activities. Narrow, specialized little activities are done, little pieces of final goods and final services. The second megatrend is the rapid migration of value from tangibles to intangibles. Knowledge-intensive intangibles are increasingly the source of all value in the modern economy. Making of things that you can see, touch, and feel increasingly creates very little value. Almost all the value encapsulated, anything that you see, emanates from the intangible component. Therefore, it's very important in terms of value creation, if you want to create a lot of value, is to focus on activities which are specialized. These are non-repetitive processes that every time you do them are different. Innovation. Innovation is a very fundamental, specialized, non-repetitive activity because it's always about doing something new. The third megatrend that I want to discuss is the rise of emerging markets. We have large local markets like China, like India, like Brazil, that can support gigantic firms. So we have new competitors, new firms, new opportunities in the world economy that never existed in the past. And these opportunities are increasing, growing at a rate faster than ever before. Okay, so let's quickly walk through the first trend. The first megatrend is GVCs. I'm going to just use this term, GVCs, global value chains, from now on. Now, GVCs are ubiquitous. They are everywhere around us. It is tempting to think that GVCs are something about high technology, but no, that's not true. We have GVCs are ubiquitous. They're in all industries, from apparel and shoes, low-tech, to high-tech, electronics, pharmaceuticals, commercial aircraft. Even the activity associated with a simple thing like a T-shirt span a dozen to 20 countries by the time you buy it for $9.99 in your local Walmart. As I mentioned to you in the flowers and bees model, GVCs are made up of mobile components, firms, and immobile components, which are locations, and these are being increasingly disaggregated across space. So here's a little example of a GVC, the Apple iPhone. Many of you have these in your pockets or in front of you. The Apple iPhone got Apple on it. Apple reaps about 35 to 55% of the total value created in that iPhone. Apple makes nothing. Apple makes nothing tangible. Apple only creates intangibles. They create the R&D, the design at the upstream end, the R&D knowledge, as you see in that picture over there. And they create the marketing knowledge at the downstream end over there. They create the brand, the after-sales service. For doing these intangibles, Apple's able to reap more than half the value created in that iPhone. We also have specialized firms like ERM Holdings in Cambridge, which also participates in this global value chain, producing basically designs for chips. They don't actually make the chips. And finally, if you look at who is actually assembling the iPhone, Foxconn, they reap 3% of the value. So what this shows you immediately is the firms associated with the tangible component reap a very, very small share of the total value. If you look at a low-tech firm like Shoes, the Danish firm Echo Shoes, again, we see the same story. Denmark, USA, Denmark, high-value processes are done in these locations. Low-value processes are done in places like Thailand, China, and Indonesia. So, what is the lesson here for policymakers? The lesson is, don't focus on industries. Don't worry about getting a car industry or a computer industry or a TV industry. Don't focus on firms. Don't focus on getting a firm like Siemens or IBM. Focus on activities, because it's not important what industry you have. It's no point being in a high technology industry if you're doing a low value activity. Don't get a very high technology firm to locate in your area if they're only going to do low value assembly. The second thing is, don't focus overly on your domestic versus foreign firms. The key distinction here is not domestic versus foreign. The key distinction is not high-tech industry versus low-tech industry. The key distinction here is between high knowledge and low knowledge. So you want to focus essentially on both your domestic firms and foreign multinational subsidiaries, and focus on the fact that you want them to do high knowledge, high skill activities in your local area. Okay, now in countries like the US even, for example, we get overly focused on supporting our domestic firms. It's equally important that we get foreign firms that do high knowledge activities. If we look at foreign subsidiaries' share of the US economy, we see that the R&D share is already about 16%. This is already data that's a couple of years old. This share is rising. Foreign multinational enterprises are increasingly accounting for more and more of the R&D and knowledge undertaken, even in the richest economies of the world. Megatrend number 2, migration of value to intangibles. If you look at the data, even back to 1975, not that long ago, 17% of market value came from intangibles. Today, we're looking at about 80%. 80% of all value created comes from intangibles, making the tangible component, this is for the economy as a whole. Obviously, in high technology industries, the percentage is even higher. So you can see how rapidly this has changed just over the space of one lifetime. We have seen an entire inversion of the world economy. Within this global value chain of high knowledge, those are the intangibles, there are two kinds of firms that are extremely important, and we call these firms that make most of the value orchestrators and specializers. Here's a little example of a commercial aircraft. Some of you may have come to Dubai on a 787, a Boeing aircraft. Boeing is the orchestrating firm, orchestrating the 787. But within that value chain, we have firms like Alcoa, which used to be a very low technology manufacturer of commodity aluminum, that has reinvented itself as a specialized firm making the fasteners that fasten that fuselage together. These are very high technology fasteners that hold the entire airframe together, made of carbon fiber, non-metallic. Each one of these fasteners is worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and they're replacing the rivets that used to hold aircraft together. Finally, the third megatrend, the rise of the emerging markets. As we see, emerging markets are increasingly entering GVCs, but how are they entering them? They're entering them through two main processes. The first process is what I would like to call spillover processes. Advanced economy multinationals are upgrading their processes that they do in emerging markets. Companies like Microsoft, companies like IBM, are changing what they do in places like China, in places like Thailand, in places like Kenya. They are changing from doing just low knowledge activities in emerging markets, increasingly doing more and more high knowledge activities, and that knowledge is spilling over into the domestic economy. The second process is the emerging economy firms are partnering with these multinational firms, these emerging economy firms, which are Chinese firms, Indian firms, Thai firms, Brazilian firms. These firms are catching up. They're implementing catch-up processes, going from doing very low knowledge activities, moving increasingly to high knowledge activities. So if we look at the smile of value creation, going from inputs to outputs, we see the knowledge is increasingly vested, as I mentioned, in R&D knowledge and marketing knowledge. We find that the old world was one where rich countries were rich because they were doing high knowledge activities and intangibles. Emerging economy countries were essentially doing low value knowledge and tangibles. And we have a third set of countries here, which are poor countries, which really don't participate very much in the global economy at all. Spillover processes are when advanced economy firms locate activities in emerging economies, and that knowledge spills over into the domestic economy. Catch-up processes are when those emerging economy firms start off by doing low knowledge activities, but increasingly use them as stepping stones. They start off by doing simple assembly, and they move up from assembly to doing more and more complex activities. And finally, entirely new industries are being launched in advanced economies. So the world economy is changing faster and faster. We look at industries, we look at firms that did not exist 10 or 15 years ago, which are today multi-billion-dollar enterprises. So, quick example of spillover processes. For India, we look at, this is work done by the Economist Intelligence Unit, asking multinational executives, what are they planning to do in India? And we see product development design, increase significant IP, research and development. All these percentages are rising at a very fast rate. The kind of activities that advanced economy firms are doing in India, or plan to do in India, are becoming more and more high knowledge. Spillover. Catch-up processes. Firms from emerging markets are increasingly joining or becoming the biggest firms in the world. And projected by 2025, that's not too far in the future, we're going to expect almost half of the biggest firms in the world are going to be headquartered in emerging economies. Let's look at one last example, and then I will conclude. And this is Haier, the company from China. This is already one of the largest companies in the world. Already today, we look at their global R&D network. This is not an advanced economy firm. This is not a German firm. This is not a Swiss firm. This is a Chinese firm. And they have a global innovation network based in China. They're undertaking R&D. They're undertaking design all over the world, from Los Angeles to South Carolina to Milan to Paris to Copenhagen and Tokyo and Osaka. Okay. Quick takeaways. What's our takeaways? Takeaways here is high knowledge activities of a low-tech foreign firm is often much more valuable than the low knowledge activity of a high-tech domestic firm. So designing running shoes creates a lot more value than assembling laptop computers. Specialized, non-repetitive activities create a lot more value than standardized repetitive activities. So you want to focus on those specialized activities if you want to create a lot of value. However, what is the lesson here if you're a poor country, if you're an emerging market economy? The lesson is, if you're a poor country or an emerging market economy, you need to enter global value chains. The way you enter, your entry ticket, is through standardized processes. You need to start off walking before you can run. There's no point trying to do R&D in a backward economy that does not have the resources to compete. An excellent example is Bangladesh, which has in the last 10 years, through simple apparel, t-shirts, assembly of a very, very simple low-technology industry, entered global value chains and is begun a process of rapid development. So you begin with low-tech, you get into global value chains, and then you implement catch-up processes. So, what's our bottom line? It's a connected world. Being connected is the key to prosperity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ram. It was a really an incredibly interesting presentation that set the stage for the other speakers because you raised a number of issues to which we now try to find the answers and leads. And let me start now with Ana Teresa Tavares-Lehmann, who comes today with one of her multiple hats. So she is an associate professor of economics at the University of Porto in Portugal. But she also has many other hats, and one of them I'd like her to draw on, which is her previous experience as a policymaker, high-level policymaker. And one of the things that Ram referred to was the fact that you have to focus better your investment promotion activities, your industrialization prospects. And the experience of Portugal, I think, is particularly interesting because it's a small country, so in a way, you may have fewer options in the traditional world of international investment, but in a world where trade is in task, of course, the possible options are much greater. And I'd like you to tell a bit more about your experience in this and how Portugal has been successful, in fact, in attracting that kind of FDI that Ram was referring to, and what.
Thank you, Andrea. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. In this panel also, I would like also to greet my colleagues. Indeed, I think that this new reconfiguration of activities propelled by global value chains is opening a host of opportunities for small economies, in particular small, open and peripheral economies. And actually been working recently with Ram on the role of peripheral economies in innovation networks, and I can link this up as well. So in fact, in a traditional world with FDI operations, countries like Portugal, for instance, would be too small to justify equity-based operation. So value chains also have the virtue of including a lot of other situations, other modes of entry that relate also to contractual forms that I would like also to draw upon. So actually this focus on activities is crucial. In this case, I would like also to draw on our experience, for example, on how some successful cases on how we are doing that. One of the issues relates to specialization, because it's also implied by the former presentation, specialization in some parts of the value chain. And for example, in the city where I come from, in Porto, where now I advise the mayor on these matters, we see that there is a huge opportunity in ICT. For example, we have subsidiaries. If we start talking about FDI, we have subsidiaries of ICT companies from all over the world with 200, 300 engineers, and they really value what they are doing there. They are really competitive and highly trained, so this specialization on tech development of digital platforms is really paying off. I would like also to bring a few other examples, since you asked me about specific examples. For example, our Center of Excellence in the automotive and aeronautics industry entered in the value chain of the Brazilian aeronautics company Embraer. So what they are doing, for example, in Portugal they do three things, but this center in particular is focused on engineering high value added activities. So there was this niche, this high value added niche, and they understood they could enter in this value chain, so they fought, they went to the competition, and they won. Eventually Embraer set up a factory in the south of Portugal, which is a different situation, but the high value added engineering is done in the north. Another example, but now on contractual forms, it's more based on our domestic sector, which is also interesting from the point of view of taking advantage of the opportunities of value chains. So we started a more serious cluster policy in 2009, and one of the clusters that actually rose bottom up. It was a group of, there are about 80 members of this cluster, among user companies, supplier companies, entities from the scientific area, universities, labs, and institutes. And what do? They develop integrated solutions for the global world. For example, they have software skills, software companies, machinery industries, metal mechanic industries. So what they do, they use the concept of factories of the future to do, like, for example, an integrated assembly lines, but really high-tech. And doing this, it's technically a turnkey project, so it's a contractual form, it's not FDI, but they add a lot of value by putting together all these technologies. And they've been promoting that abroad. There's another example of an association of these companies that do machines, high-tech machines. What they are doing, they are promoting themselves in terms of other contractual form, notably international subcontracting, but of high value added. So they have the skills. What they are doing, small batches, because their strength is not in mass production. Their strength is in small batches adapted to particular uses. So they are very competitive in innovating in new solutions. The health cluster in Portugal, for example, now we are working together with them in terms of attracting a lab. So it's a kind of a high-quality service center of this. And we work at different tiers, also in more sort of mass terms. We also have several shared service centers, for example, for accounting, processing salaries. So these are some of the niches that I would probably start by highlighting.
Very interesting, and in fact, what I think is also, by the way, it's also very interesting to hear. Now, let me remove my official hat as an OECD officer and take the other hat, which is of a European citizen. I think it's always very good to hear. There are many positive stories from Europe, including from Southern Europe. So I'm very happy to hear this and other stories, and which leads me to the other question, which is at the level of the policies that are necessary. Again, Portugal means Europe, it means Portugal means the local authorities. What kind of articulation and governance you think is opportune for this kind of policies to promote, again, the territory as the basis for a proactive internationalization across value chains?
Well, I think, it requires also new skills from policymakers. First of all, they need to understand the context, and I'm not so sure that all of them already understood what's going on, because when you listen to their policy statements, they come, and say, well, we have these 5 new strategic markets. And these are whatever, Brazil, Russia, you name it, the Emirates. And this is a very conservative view, although I'm not denying it can be relevant in some cases, but it's a very conservative view. That is not really the view that permits to make the most of the concept of value chains, because it doesn't really understand this business of trading in activities. For example, understanding value chains requires an innovative conception of markets as well. Understanding the value chain as a market, or as a chain of markets, because every part of the value chain can be conceived as a market for R&D, a market for design, a market for post-sale service, etc. So I think at the base must be a new conception of markets that I'm not so sure all policymakers have. And then another thing, what is then the best, understanding this, what is then the best positioning for a country or for some areas. So a positioning that is realistic, because it's not what you want in theory, but what is compatible with your assets, capabilities, and resources. So finding this match and incorporating it within this concept is crucial. In terms of governance, specifically, that you asked about, I think it requires a serious partnership between the government, the public entities, and the private sector. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, I would stress, at least from my experience, the importance of business intelligence activities, knowledge management activities, working in a network in a way that reduces red tape, bureaucracy, and so on as much as possible, that increases transparency, is key. The other thing is that the government alone cannot do most of the things, of course, and I think it really requires communicating with the help also of the private actors, communicating the opportunities and the niches to the outside world. For example, in Portugal, if I start telling stories, the people wouldn't know about them because we are not communicating it as effectively as we should. So linking with the private sector, knowing, in a humble way, learning from them, asking them what do they require, also instilling on them this vision of, global value chains, promoting approximations between suppliers, clients, etc. So I think this requires really working in a network in an effective way.
Thank you. You mentioned Embraer, which is, as some of you or most of you know, a Brazilian aircraft manufacturer, mm-hmm. and Ram mentioned Haier from China, which is one of the world's largest producers of white goods. Thailand also is home to some of these emerging multinationals, so it's not only the largest of the emerging economies, but also smaller, even if, of course, Thailand is a country of 80 million, so I wouldn't call it a small country by any means, but it's definitely smaller than the BRICS. And I'd like Pavidya Pananon, who is a professor of international business at Thammasat University, which is one of the Ivy League universities in Southeast Asia, and also has a lot of experience in analyzing these firms, but also in serving as a board member of some of them, to tell us a bit more about the growing aspirations of some of these companies, and especially, again, how their trajectory, how the pattern of internationalization is linked to the mergers of global value chains.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, first of all, to NASA, the organizer, for having me here. My first time in Dubai and very eye-opening experience. So thank you for this opportunity. And thank you also for putting me on this panel, which I find very central to my interests. And I think also for the interest of many smaller emerging economies that are not the countries that Ram has mentioned, the BRICS. Not everyone has the experience of Brazil, Russia, India, and China to have those kind of giant firms. And I think Thailand, as well as other Southeast Asian countries, for example, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, are also in a different group of emerging economies that perhaps have experienced a different way of emerging. And to answer your question, Andrea, I would like to bring your attention to the kind of policy that this country have followed, which is the export-led country. So that's right, Ram has said that the first ticket into the global value chain is to get entry into the global value chain. And these firms in Thailand, they have got entry as suppliers and manufacturers into the global value chain because that's what Thailand attracted in the first place through inward investment. And local firms also develop as suppliers in these global value chains. And eventually, they do not stay as suppliers forever, and they would want to emerge out and become multinational themselves. So if you look at the statistic from Thailand, the firms that are actually the leading multinationals from Thailand are in the same industry of the industry that Thailand has long been the exporters. For example, agribusiness and food is one of the sectors that we see a lot of Thai firms active in that. So that shows that and if you look at the firm level case study analysis, you would see that most of the firm, for example, I would mention a firm called Thai Union Frozen, which many of you probably don't know. They started first as a canned tuna manufacturer, no brand, OEM manufacturer, simply manufacturing, write what you say, beginning at the bottom end of manufacturing. And they have eventually moved up, and now they are the largest canned tuna operator in the world and owns most of the brands that are consumed in America, Chicken of the Sea, Bumblebee, as well as those in Europe and Northern Europe as well. So this is a pattern that I think we have not looked at enough, because we seem to think that when firms from emerging economies can join into the global value chain, and it's an automatic ticket to prosperity, which I think is not always the case. Because when we look at the emergence through global value chain, and I would like to draw attention to also the dynamics with the lead firms. The lead firms are the firms that are more dominant in that value chain, and you have written a lot about firms that are buyer-driven. So these are firms that are, the value chain is driven more by the buyer. Large retailers like Walmart, like all the big retailers of the world. But then there is another type, the producer-driven. These are firms that are driven by multinationals that focus a lot on R&D. Cars and electronics are example of those, whereas the buyer would be more like apparel, food, shoes, and all those things. If you look at this, I think that when you look at the world of global value chain from lead firm perspective, it's a nice picture, because you divide the activities, you outsource into cheaper countries so you can have low manufacturing costs. But when you look from the view of emerging market economies that are trying to rise above the manufacturing level, there is some kind of glass ceiling, because lead firms may want you to improve your product and your process of upgrading. But when you want to get into the same thing that create value in that value chain, which is what you mentioned, brand, marketing, and R&D, then that's become the competitor, direct competitor to lead firms. So I think that within this dynamics of global value chain, there is a lot for the local firms to try to focus on how to move up the value chain. And I think Thailand is one of the examples of not having enough firms that are doing well enough in terms of moving up, because most of the firms started first as supplier and manufacturer. So for them to break through this glass ceiling level and see the importance of moving up to the downstream end and the upstream end is still a big challenge, not just for the firm, but for the government as well. So Thailand is now saying that, you know, we want to attract high-tech industry, we want to create a digital economy. But again, we are not looking at what you just said, that the high-tech activities of anything is more important than the high-tech industry itself. So to recap, your question of how Thai firm has emerged and how it has led to the understanding of the global value chain. I think the experience of Southeast Asia is a good example to also look at global value chain from a different perspective, from the perspective of firms that start at the bottom and trying to go up, and it's not always automatic. So the key takeaway for this is that the onus is always on the local firm to improve themselves and to try to move up. So I think for policy takeaway for government agency is that outward investment or the emergence of firms is not a separate development of economy. You cannot just promote outward FDI. This morning we hear that outward FDI policy would be a key part. And I think one key part is to understand how you link the inward FDI policy with the domestic development of industrial capacity, and then that would lead to outward investment in the end. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. No, fascinating. And actually, while you were presenting these cases, I thought that very often in many countries, but especially in emerging economies, there is a tendency to promote the emergence of regional multinationals from emerging economies. But from what you were saying, it seems that a company like TUF and others that I know of, but of whom you know much more than me, actually they went global well before going regional. Mm-hmm. And now with the emergence of the Asian economic community, do you think that that opens up new possibilities, or on the contrary, that it's better if the good ASEAN and especially Thai firms still look at the global markets without stopping at the regional markets? What is your take on this?
Okay, ASEAN, you know, thank you for this question. I'm really sorry I can be here only for one day because tomorrow we're organizing a big conference on the ASEAN Economic Community. So if any of you happen to fly past Bangkok, you know, do let me know and you can join the conference. So tomorrow I play your role, I be the moderator on this thing, asking firms what they think of this. But my take on the AEC or ASEAN Economic Community, Southeast Asia is trying to become more like the EU in the sense that we have had free trade agreement, but now we are trying to be more than a free trade area and be common market. And I think that there are both positive and negative with relative to the development of emerging firms. The positive side is that, sure, it expands the market to the region. I think Thailand is the country that is most excited about this integrated Southeast Asia. When I talk to colleagues in Vietnam or in other countries, they are not too keen, but well, that's Thailand's problem. Thailand has a lot of problems, and this is one problem that we seem to be so fixed on the region. But I think what I would like to also take a look at is that the caveats of looking at the region only. The positive is that, yes, it allows Thai firms to perhaps relocate their lower value-added activities to countries that are less developed within the region. For example, Thai plants can relocate manufacturing activities to Vietnam or Cambodia. So that's good for firms and good for the countries because firms become more competitive. But I think if we only look at that without understanding that the need to move up the value chain is also there for Thai firms and for the Thai government to promote more, moving up to higher value-added activities. If we don't do that enough, then it would become that we are just promoting the region. And it can also limit the view of the firms to promoting, to going to areas where the government is promoting. I just completed a research report on the multinational and performance and policy implications for the government. And one of the things that I said, which is perhaps not well liked by the Board of Investment, Agency of Thailand, is that I don't think that we should select industry, nor should we select areas and destinations for firms, because I think that firms would know best where to go and what to do. So by government promoting particular area and saying that, okay, now this is the AEC era, so let's push all firms into this area, I think it could bring some dangerous implication that firms would look at this area rather than looking at what is best for them. So I would still look at AEC and expanded region with some caution on misguiding the firms.
Thank you very much, Pavida. Now we talked about bees. Now with talking about some of the Thai successful bees, let's go back to the flowers. And definitely Dubai is a flower, there's no doubt about that. And many people say it's a flower that owes a lot to location, but location is something that exists, and some countries are better at seizing the opportunities than others. And so I'd like, we have the privilege of having Mahmoud Al-Bastaki, who is the CEO of Dubai Trade, and to tell us more about the strategy that over the past 30 years, but especially in the more recent past, Dubai has used again to turn this inherited location advantage into a competitive advantage, which is something that is said and done, but that apparently Dubai has been very successful at. So, Mahmoud.
All right, thank you. And welcome everybody to Dubai. Everybody's asleep, but I hope my voice will wake you up a little bit. Dubai, historically, I mean, as a location, as the gentleman was saying, we can't change location. We are here. We are blessed with this location being close to Africa, close to Asia, close to the Middle East. So we are between East and West, and this location has been an advantage to us. But looking at the port or the trade ports of Dubai, it's not the best location. It's not the best natural location. Look at the busiest port in the region, which is Jebel Ali. It's not even a natural harbor. But we made it the point of port for the entire region. So Dubai leveraged the physical location along the difficulties of the not being natural harbors with many key drivers. The key drivers are basically the government of Dubai and UAE in general, the leadership who is very ambitious, who wants to make this place the happiest place on earth, who wants to make this place ahead of the game, who want to be number one no matter what in many areas, very ambitious, very determined, very committed, and very dedicated leadership that we have. The government invested a lot on the infrastructure. Look at I talked about the port of Jebel Ali today can handle more than 19 million containers, and this is the seventh largest port in the world. Look at the airport. Our passenger airport has surpassed Heathrow lately. It's the busiest international passenger in the world. Even freight-wise, for the trade and volume of trade, Al Maktoum Airport will be the busiest port in the world. And the road infrastructure is very fertile for the cargo and goods to move in this country. So the government invested a lot in the physical, hard infrastructure of this region. It's not only the location, it's all the things around it. There's a seamless integration between multiple private and government sectors. That will make Dubai very unique. Plus, the seamless integration between sea and air. A shipment that comes by the sea can leave to the port, to the airport in less than 1 hour through a logistics corridor. So, plus any shipment before even reaching the boundaries of Dubai and UAE, it can be cleared, and it can be, all the documentation can be processed prior to the shipments coming to Dubai. So all these automation, advanced forward-looking, made this location really feasible to be the captive area for this trade in this region. In terms of numbers, from 1994 until 2003, the non-oil foreign trade grew from 66 billion to 153 billion, a growth rate of 8.5% year on year. Dubai Trade, the entity that I am heading, was launched in 2003. This has really made the trade flow seamlessly and attracted lots of investors, multinationals to this region, and made their office of their operations, the regional offices in Dubai, because of ease of doing business, ease of moving things around. The trade volume have moved from 2004 from 216 billion to 846 billion with 20% year-on-year growth. So it's a huge growth. The online transactions in Dubai Trade Portal itself, from 2003 it was 100,000. Today, in 2014, we have handled more than 18 million online transactions. So the E part of the story made the location very much attractive to bring all these companies. Thank you.
Very interesting, because the point I think you made on trade facilitation in particular is crucial, because it's one of the main targets of the global trade. The debate is how to allow for this. And what has been the role of the private sector in this? Because as you say, the government leadership was very crucial, but what kind of dialogue have you put in place to discuss the priorities in terms of reform, trade facilitation? How do you talk to the private sector on this? How do you create synergies with the private sector?
Whatever we do, we involve the private sectors. We, as government, we don't claim that we know everything. We pursue perfection, but we don't claim perfections. We engage all the community, especially the area that we are working with, the trading, the shipping and logistics. We bring the shipping lines, the freight forwarders, and tell them this is what we want to do. Is this what will make trade easier in Dubai? Is this what will help you in your business? This will give you more visibility, more transparency, and that's what the private sector wants. They want things to move faster, better, and more cost effective. And all what we do, we put these parameters into the equations. Are we doing things that will make the private sector do their business better and will get glued to Dubai to be the place for their operations? Because we want people to stay here. And for them to stay here, they should really find it attractive in many areas. It's not only safety, it's the ease of doing business, it's the transparency, it's the outgoing, the openness. And we in Dubai, we are very close to the private sector, that we engage them with us in making the decision and making Dubai what it's meant to be.
Thank you very much. And I think the main takeaway, at least for me, is that there is no silver bullet, and at the same time that it's very naive to think in terms of either government or state-led, either state-led or private sector-led development trajectory. Is much more about the dialogue. And Christina Knudsen at GDP Global, based in London and in other locations, she's a director of this very influential consultancy firms that advises governments in their investor targeting programs. And what, on the basis of your rich background and experience in many countries in the world, Christina, what are the main takeaways that they can take from this in terms of countries and not only national government but also subnational governments targeting either investors, industries, activities, tasks? We heard many different things. We also heard from Anna Teresa that not always government officials are ready to understand that the world is changing. Is that also your experience, or you are fortunate enough only to deal with very wise policymakers?
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a great privilege. I'm a practitioner. I'm a pragmatic person, so I'll try to give some examples. I'm a non-academic, so I liked your flower and bees model, by the way, Ram. You said before, Ram, that firms and locations change quick. I'm not totally in agreement with that, with exception from Dubai, because you created the location first. Right. I would like to give an example, if I may, because I think by giving a little case, it will probably exemplify more what I experienced, not from this particular government that I worked with, but that I can probably repeat for many other countries, unfortunately. The example comes from the textile industry and a small country in Central America. This country was doing extremely well in the textile industry, and as you may know, it's one of the most labor-intensive industries. It's also not so high-tech. It's low-tech at the apparel end, and it's much more high-tech at the textile, where you do the spinning and all the new yarns, the modern fabrics. I'm just going to develop this a little bit, so I'll make the point. There is 50 of the largest companies generate 60% of worldwide sales in the textile industry. It moves many billions, and to this little country, it contributed to over 8% of its GDP, 42 or almost 45% of its employment in the private sector, and 44, almost 50%, yeah, of its export. So because you can see it was very, very dependent. So what happened with this little country? They had a strategy 10 years ago, which they worked with quite successfully for 5 years. Quite successfully was that they actually created new activities based on all the knowledge they had and all the different processes. So they started getting a very good integration in the business, and they also won some very important projects that were what do you call that? High-tech textiles, yeah, modern textiles, which was a great advancement for them. So what happened? The government changed, and suddenly the country, the investment promotion agency was still, promoting for textiles, didn't get an investment for 5 years. So they decided maybe it's time that we should have another strategy and see what went wrong, or why aren't we not achieving? So what happened was that we're very lucky we did this work, and from all the interviews with the private sector, with the public sector, lots of things came out, and I think this is a task that was essential after 10 years. The country had become extremely uncompetitive in a spot of 5 years. So companies move quicker, countries move very slowly. Had they detected this earlier, they wouldn't have lost investments. They would probably have a value proposition if they had done something earlier. Now it's very late, but they have to do it very quickly. And this is something that we have seen also in other countries, creating value propositions, because when you get into the point of creating the value proposition, you've got to do the research, you've got to get that intelligence that you were mentioning before, Eva. You really have to dig down to the ground to find why should anybody come to this location in particular to do something in this industry, when the electricity cost was totally uncompetitive. In fact, American textile companies are reshoring, backshoring. They're going back to their destinations because electricity is very cheap in the United States. This little country had one of the highest costs in their region, so they could not be competitive. Did the government do anything about this? No. They just let it go and increased the cost of electricity, which I would say half of the industry was dependent on it. And the other half of the industry in textile and apparel is not dependent on electricity, more dependent on labor. Yeah? So it's two different areas. So the cost structure had changed completely. They had lost their competitiveness, and there were some obviously key issues in policy and in regulations and in delivery, I would say. So the labor flexibility wasn't there in an industry where working hours is of essential importance. You can't take a new order from a big client, quick turnaround. That's why they're doing it in Central America and not in China, because they can do the short runs, they can do the quick deliveries, and just in time or the smart deliveries. And there was no way they could be competitive because the hourly, the working hours were not allowed to be flexible. You can't run 2 shifts, totally out of the way. So that made them even more uncompetitive. So the price of the electricity plus to the labor flexibility, now we have customs. The round of interviews and talking with all the big companies and small companies and local companies shows that the custom process was absolutely appalling. It was really, really uncompetitive, delaying, expensive. So what was a country that was competitive and had a very good position, especially in this new area of model textiles, where they had a little world cluster, small but a little world cluster, that whole, what they had built up in 5 years, they almost lost it. And that is a government initiative that could have been taken earlier. However, government was more busy doing politics during this time. This is quite a typical scenario, isn't it? So rather than being busy seeing that we have a good investment climate. So the potential loss for this country in production was up to 30%. Added to this, you also had the trade agreement that was come in force, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So you had the trade agreements to this and how it can affect, because that means that Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc., would be much more competitive than they already are. So that means the country would have lost, I hope not, I hope they do something about it, lose out totally of competitiveness in a time frame of 5 years.
Thank you very much, Christina. And
I'll just add one thing. Sorry, Andrea. So my point here is that government really has to act as a catalyst. It has to monitor. It has to be on top and speak and communicate with industry, which was not happening in this case at all. It has to look at long-term solutions, but work on them in the short term, not just push them forward. It's about having competitive policies. Restrictions are not good for creating jobs, for creating wealth, for creating growth, and creating competitiveness. However, there's kind of a little wave of restrictions coming along. A long-term view, and you know all the good examples of long-term view. We have one here in Dubai, and small countries often have larger chances of being very effective, right, in changing policies, because you can do it quickly, you can do it swiftly, you can get the people with you. But it's obviously harder for big countries. So they're taking the long-term view, and when it comes to the investment promotion agencies, I have been a promoter myself for 10 years for my country, which is Sweden. I'm a promoter at heart. Now I promote globally, not my country, but other countries. I am passionate about the business of promoting countries, nations, regions, cities, municipalities, and hitting at the being number one, as you do here in Dubai. We want to be number one. That's a great view. So no agency, no IPA, no agency can really, as hard as they work, can really supersede the institutional context within which it works. That would be my last point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Again, I mean, we heard about the importance of the government acting as a catalyst because of all these flowers that compete. And one of the Bs of the United Arab Emirates is the aluminium industry, which is located here because, of course, of location advantage, but also because energy is so important in the aluminium business. Ali Hamd Mahad Al Zaghini is the Senior Vice President at Jebel Ali Operations and Cell Technology. So I would like to hear a bit more about one of the big industrial projects of in this part of the world, which is the Jebel Ali smelter operation, and especially your efforts at innovating in order to reduce, improve the energy efficiency and reduce the energy use which is involved in the aluminium. The floor is yours.
Thank you. What I'll tell is basically a very nice story, and it could reflect in Dubai. Is when you look at EGA, or the starting seed, which was Dubai Aluminium Company, it was initially built as utilizing a waste energy, which was the flare gas being produced during the oil production. The late ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid, seeing that, converted into a resource, which was electricity at the time. And then what to do with it? Dubai is a small city, you have a lot of electricity. An industry was brought, was aluminium production. So you build a smelter. When you're building it, you're in a desert, there is a need for water. So as a part of a power plant, you were able to capture the energy wasted during the power production, converted to a resource, which was water, which being supplied to city of Dubai. So that's how it started. And the technology initially which was brought in from the US. The company which built the project was a British company at the time. So you can see how it's turning it out. In 10 years' time, the seeds were put into place that this company turns from a technology buyer to actually a technology self-sufficient. At the same time, it built the seed for a phenomenal growth. We had a production of around 135,000 tons when we started. By the time we reached 1990, this has gone up almost to 250,000. And at that time, we were able actually to develop an in-house technology which made us self-sufficient and made us actually independent. And that was one of the key objectives when the company was built. So a technology was developed which was still not ready to be used globally, but was sufficient for a local use. And at that time, expansions were done using this technology. And when the expansions were happening, the seed was put in place to actually turn us into a technology developing and a knowledge-based company. And at that time, we had actually started working with an Australian company to develop a smelting technology. And within about 4 years of development, we were able to introduce a technology which was used in our subsequent expansion. So we went from around 135,000 to 250,000 to almost 600,000 using an in-house developed technology. And that's when the time came actually to make the next move. Is now you had your infants, you're starting to grow up, and now you need to be a grown-up where you actually have not only control your fate, you're actually exporting technology. And that's where we started working on developing technologies, fully independent, using actually resources globally. We have a very strong base locally with a strong local R&D personnel, but at the same time, we do use resources globally to help us control cost. So see, the vision which is built is not to spend. The whole idea is to be self-sufficient, contain at the same time profitable business. And that's the vision which was used to build the technology. And today, I can proudly say we have one of the best technologies available in smelting. We're actually now looking at exporting the technology. We have already signed a technology deal, and we're in negotiation with more than 4 or 5 different parties today to transfer a technology which has been developed in the United Arab Emirates and exported externally. This technology has been demonstrated in Tawila plant, which is the largest aluminium smelter in the world, with a production capacity of over 1.3 million tons. Today, EGA, the parent company of Dubal and EMAL, is the 5th largest aluminium producer in the world. And today, we're in the business of selling technology. As you can see, for a small company, buying technology using a waste resource into a company which today actually is very focused on exporting know-how and shifting the business model. At the same time, when this is happening, the leadership vision of becoming number one is driving this whole process. And today our ambition is to be the global leader of aluminum industry. Today we're working in-house on a new development, which hopefully by end of the 3 years, the concept is completed and the design work is finished. And upon converting it into a prototype and implementation, it is my personal belief that this company will be the leader in the aluminum business in the near future. And that's the vision, and that's how we're moving. And keeping all of this in mind, this has been one of the most profitable aluminum companies today. And keeping in mind, aluminum industry has gone through a very rough period over the past 20 years since the fall of the Soviet Union and the flood of metal coming out of Russia, where the prices collapsed, going into the recession. Now with the market dynamics changing, having a huge overhang of inventory, we have been every year able to sell our metal in October the year before. So we're always sold ahead 1 year ahead of schedule. And that's a unique position to any smelter. And since the time I have been in the company, we have made a profit every year. And here, a lot of people, when we tell the story, they attribute it to cheap energy. And that's a false implication, is we actually pay competitive price to our energy, but the know-how and the quality of product we make has been able to put us in that position. And today, in the new technology we have been developing, we have been able to reduce more than 15% energy consumption compared to the original technology we started with. We have been able to reduce the environmental impact of smelting, especially on the emissions level, where we call them PFC, perfluorocarbon emissions. And these are gases which have huge global impact on global warming. We have been able to reduce them more than 92%. Keeping in mind our production increased almost tenfold. And that's a story, I think, which reflects the story of Dubai. And I give my thanks to the committee for giving me this chance.
Thank you, because it was really interesting. And what I particularly appreciate you is this idea that you can move from a vision to a reality. Now, at the global level, we already have had since 2001, at least with the MDGs, a global vision of eradicating poverty. And as it was mentioned this morning in the leaders segment, and as you all know, 2015 is a crucial year with the Finance for Development Conference in Addis next July, and then the Development Summit of the UN in New York in September, and eventually the COP21 Summit in Paris in December. So the UN system, of course, is at the center of this this fight against poverty and towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And what is the role that global value chains can play in this? And we have Mia Mikic from the Trade and Investment Division of ESCAP, which is the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. She's also from Bangkok. At least she's been living in Bangkok for many years, and so she joins us for this panel. And I'd like you, Mia, to tell us a bit more about what the UN system, and in particular the regional economic commissions, including ESCAP, can do to use the development and exploit the developmental potential of global value chains in terms of meeting the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you also to the organizers for giving the opportunity for two speakers from ESCAP, and then more than that from Bangkok, to be here today. We really find this as a useful opportunity to touch base with our other colleagues from the region and globally. So thank you very much for that opportunity. I hope you haven't had the opportunity to read the latest Economist that had two articles on Sustainable Development Goals in the Friday issue, and that are quite critical of the vision of the United Nations in pursuing these goals. So in order to tackle your question, Andrea, allow me to step back a little bit and go into this story of locations and beats for the Asia Pacific, because from other speakers, it is very clear that global value chains are seen as a driver of many things: employment, growth, investment, trade, innovation, etc. But we actually know quite little about what triggers them in or pushes them into these locations. And that's why we actually struggle with understanding what countries that lack being part of the global value chains need to do in order to attract these triggering motions. For example, if you look at whatever measurement of global value chains we have at present, they exist mostly in 10 of Asia-Pacific countries that we have analyzed. And then the number of sectors in which they occur are also extremely few. All right? So we definitely need to know better and more about what is the size and the determinants of that size in the global value chains. But thanks to your organization, OECD, and some other international organizations, we have actually gotten some measurements of the size of the global value chains, and what we have what we now understand is that manufacturing side of these global value chains is actually not the most important, or maybe not most dynamic. That indeed services are the ones that are creating a higher value added for forward export, if you wish. And this is very important finding, because in some of our economies that are very small, it is probably less possible to develop the manufacturing part of the chains, and it is much more plausible to actually look at this servicification content of these. And from the examples that we have heard here, not only in Dubai, but also for some other sectors, it appears that services indeed can be something that we need to look closer. Now, whatever it may take, services and manufacturing together, when we calculate the share of global value chains in global trade, then it appears that they drive about 50 to 60% of intermediate trade, at least. And as such, they are quite important for growing that trade. And that brings me to the Sustainable Development Goals, because as you may know, apart from many goals that United Nations community and global community considering to put forward to the countries later this year to adopt, trade becomes very important part of the story, since it is labeled as one of the major means of implementation of the rest of the goals. There are currently 17 goals that countries are looking at, and the 17th one being means of implementation, including not only trade and investment, but also other areas of financing for development, including remittances from the migration of labor. Now, what do we mean by trade being means of implementation of Sustainable Development Goals? Well, it's hard to say without really knowing concretely what these goals will be, but looking from the experiences from Millennium Development Goals and looking at the really the visions of the governments that they have with respect to development of their countries, which is really removing poverty and making peaceful, harmonious societies that will be also not too aggressive to their environments in terms of the natural context. Then trade and foreign direct investment can contribute quite a bit in development of the approach to furthering productive capacity in those countries that will be more inclusive and less environmentally damaging. The best way, from what we have gathered, is for these chains themselves and the parts of the chains, which is the companies, to be sustainable and to worry about their sustainability. Now, what does that mean? These are big words that we tend to use, but when we talk about that, we actually mean corporate sustainability in all three aspects that are then raised to the global level, meaning efficiency in economic sense, but means also socially responsible in terms of how they treat not only their labor force, but also how do they treat the competition and include the relationship with other companies and firms and inclusion of small and medium-sized enterprises, and also the environmental sustainability or responsibility context. And in that way, we also tend to now look at not really chains as a linear process, but the circular process, the famous 3 Rs, looking into recycling, reconditioning, and reuse of resources, so that we include in the process not only from the production to the consumption, but also how do we take back whatever remains from the consumption back into the process of production. And so the companies that are deemed to be responsible in that both social and environmental context are looking at the whole life cycle of their production and are trying to build that into their principles of everyday doing business. As you know, United Nations have been put in place the principles for the Global Compact that deal with these major issues of not only labor standards and environmental sustainability, but also how to do business in a legally sort of a transparent and acceptable way, and how do not engage in unacceptable business practices. What do we do as a regional commission to help companies and governments in that context? Well, we definitely promote social businesses and social investment as principles for the behavior of companies. But we also work with not only private sector in that context, but governments in order to help companies actually behave in that way. And that is much easier to do in the enabling environment, what we call enabling environment for doing business and doing investment, where the governments themselves put in place transparent policies, behave in an accountable way, and lead by the examples of business sector from their own way. As a regional commission, we have put in place at least 2 mechanisms that I would like to mention. One is ESCA Business Advisory Council, where we put together, we have brought together more than 50 eminent CEOs from Asia Pacific that regularly meet and advise our senior management in not only advise, but also work with the senior management in a context of how to move this agenda forward, and also learn from us what they can do in not only their companies, but in companies that they network with in promoting these principles of social responsibility. We also have Asia Pacific Business Forum and Asia Pacific Trade Facilitation Forum that meet annually and work with business sector on promoting these ideas and principles, and also trying to put in place the regional norms and regional frameworks Two, for example, we have heard how important it is to reduce trade costs and to smoothen the way through which the companies can go from one market to the other market and see the markets, the chain of markets rather than one only. So we are working on regional arrangements for our countries to actually be able to put that into practice. Let me stop there, and I will welcome further questions if there are.
Thank you very much, Mia. We started 30 minutes late, and we are now 30 minutes late, so we basically have respected at least our own timeline. But if you have a question, I think it's a great opportunity with these distinguished speakers from all over the world. So if you have questions, please be short with your questions, but do ask your questions.
My name is Dr. Iyad Abu Haltam. I'm from Amman Chamber of Industry. My question is to Professor Mudambi. Actually, your bee flower model is fascinating. It's based on two factors or variables, high knowledge activities versus low knowledge activities, and high value activities versus low value activities. What about high labor intensive activities versus low labor intensive activities? And from a host country point of view, this is a very important and vital factor, especially if you know that many Arab countries are poor countries where unemployment rate is the most challenging factor. And let's bear in mind the lady from Sweden example, that what she mentioned about the textile industry and how important it's the labor intensive factor in the model of investments and value chain creation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and I think it's probably one of the thorniest. You put your finger on probably one of the thorniest aspects that arises from global value chain analysis. Yeah, that is the as we migrate from low knowledge to high knowledge activities, from specialized to standardized, from standardized to specialized activities. We're moving also to oftentimes lower labor intensive activities. And so what do we do with the labor force? You know, ultimately this is one of the biggest challenges facing not only poor countries, I would hasten to say, but also advanced economies. I mean, some of the research we're doing right now on the global automotive industry, we're looking at Detroit in the United States. And this is a challenge that faces the United States as well, because we have, of course, as the migration of value goes to specialized activities, the automotive industry moves most of the manufacturing to low-cost locations. The workers remain in the location. The low-knowledge workers remain in the location. And so this is an enormous policy challenge, and one that all countries in the world are going to have to grapple with equally. So I congratulate you. That's really probably the most important question to ask. I think the answer to this really lies in, there's no simple answer to a question as big as this. But let me just give you one or two pointers, or one or two, because I've been thinking about this quite deeply. One is to distinguish between knowledge and skill. That's one of the reasons that I try to make the distinction between repetitive and non-repetitive activities. Oftentimes when you think about high knowledge, very often you are led to think of universities, you're led to think of PhD scientists and so on. But equally well, we have a lot of high skill activities in services. These might be things like areas like electrician jobs, plumbing jobs, maintenance jobs, all of these things to do with maintenance of infrastructure. A lot of these jobs are increasingly very non-repetitive. Certainly, I don't know if this is true in your house, but certainly in my house, if I need to try and get somebody to fix my plumbing, I have to pay a lot of money to get somebody who is not necessarily a university graduate. So there are a lot of professions, a lot of high-skilled professions, which we as educators, we as policymakers need to be focusing on moving forward. The second thing I think we need to think about is to focus on in the entry ticket examples. I think Pavita also mentioned. In a lot of poor economies, it is therefore important to focus on these standardized activities as entry tickets, because not only are they entry tickets, but they also tend to be more labor intensive. So the poorest economies tend to be the economies which have a lot of labor, and therefore these low knowledge, high labor intensive activities are very suited for these poorer economies. And the third point I'd like to make to you, and this is perhaps a little self-serving for those of us who are higher education, is that increasing importance of lifelong learning. Because in the richest economies, we can no longer say that we're going to educate people between the ages of 18 and 22 and then send them into the world and forget about education after that. Because increasingly what's going to happen in the world of the future is when these people become 30, they're going to need to enter a new profession. When they're 40, they're going to have to enter yet another profession. And so we need to constantly be retraining people. We need to be thinking about constantly moving them to the bleeding edge of technology. This is something, when I gave this talk last year in Denmark to the Trade Union Congress, the trade union leaders came to me afterwards, and I was a little worried, thinking, well, and they were in fact very happy to hear this, because they said this is exactly what our members need to hear. Because in Denmark, we are a very rich economy, but we need our workers to constantly be upskilled. Constant upskilling is the key.
Thank you. So unless there are other questions, let me thank a lot the organizers for putting together this panel, but especially our speakers today that gave us so many fascinating hints, and I think that we finished really on a high note with this central role of people, because it's infrastructure, it's policies, it's institutions, but at the end of the day, it's the people that make the difference. So investing in people is crucial for global development, is crucial for national development, it is crucial, of course, for attracting investment. So let me